All right, thank you very much for joining me here today. I appreciate it very much for your tuning in. A lot of China stories to go through today, and I want to begin with this topic, and it deals with China and Hollywood. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. Here it is plainly. China is invading the American movie industry. Now, you won't hear this from any other news outlet, but it's very true. You probably noticed that our movies in recent years have been very different than compared to, let's say, older Hollywood movies, but very few know that there's actually an encroachment on U.S. national security happening on this front, which is popular culture, particularly movies. And let me give you some clear examples from prominent Hollywood films to illustrate this. For example, Top Gun Maverick with Tom Cruise attempted to strip the Taiwanese and Japanese flags off of Cruise's jacket. And for example, Iron Man 3 as well, the movie inserted a Chinese doctor into the movie who saves the life of Tony Stark. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Are these artistic licenses, or is it something else? There's plenty of more examples of this, more than I can cover here today, but if you're interested into a deep dive on this topic, NTD actually produced a groundbreaking new film titled Hollywood Takeover, China's Control in the Film Industry. This NTD original documentary follows former Hollywood executive Chris Fenton and investigative news reporter Tiffany Meyer through their journey of discovering a must-tell story behind Hollywood and China's lucrative union. The film will be released globally on March 8th on Epoch TV. For more information about the documentary, visit HollywoodTakeover.com. It actually has the first 10 minutes of the movie that you can watch for free. I'm actually going to put the first 5 minutes at the end of this episode. I had a small role actually behind the scenes for this film, so if you're interested, feel free to take a look. And this next topic I want to bring your attention to is also very significant, which is that a surprising end to a 30-year political tradition in China, which gave foreign governments and investors insight into the world's second largest economy. So what I'm talking about here is a spokesman has announced that China's Premier Li Qiang will not hold a media briefing after this year's National People's Congress. And this was a tradition since the 1990s. In fact, there will be no such press conference for the rest of the term ending in 2027, unless there is a special circumstance. Since the early 90s, China has actively shared its politics and policies during this briefing to attract foreign investors and boost trade. So why is China scrapping a 3-decade-old tradition? Well, it's all guesswork now, but there may be some hints in the scrapped briefing coincidentally coming at a time when China is struggling to revive its troubled economy. It's under major pressure from a property crisis, deepening inflation, a stock market rout, and mounting local debt. Now, the overall event is known as the Two Sessions, when China's rubber stamp legislature and top advisory body convene. It's a rubber stamp legislature because delegates at the parliamentary meeting have little power, since policy decisions have already been made in closed-door sessions by elite members. Moving on. China could soon be blocked from buying oil from the U.S. emergency supply. U.S. lawmakers included this measure in new government funding bills. The provision would ban China from purchasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The issue was magnified when the Biden administration released a record 180 million barrels from the SPR to tame energy prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 1 million barrels were sold to the Texas arm of a Chinese state-owned giant. Critics are saying that sales from the emergency stockpile should not benefit China as competition and tension intensifies between China and the U.S. Meanwhile, Apple's iPhone sales in China fell 24% year-on-year in the first 6 weeks of 2024, according to research firm Counterpoint. And this is as the U.S. company faced increased competition from domestic rivals, such as Huawei. Here's more.
The US company took a hit due to stronger competition from domestic Chinese competitors. The report said Apple's main local rival Huawei saw unit sales up 64% in the period. Apple dropped to 4th place in terms of Chinese market share. It was second in the same period last year when it made up almost a fifth of the market. Huawei took that position as its market share expanded to 16.5% from just under a tenth a year earlier. But the report showed the overall smartphone market in China shrank 7%. Apple began subsidizing certain iPhone models in the country by as much as $180 last week. It had already offered discounts on its official sites last month. Huawei has seen premium smartphone sales rise since it released its Mate 60 series in August. The firm had struggled for years with US restrictions placed on it, but sales suggest it is finally seeing a way out of trouble.
And as well, shares in Tesla fell more than 7% on Monday after its sales declined in February in China, where it faces growing competition from local rivals like BYD. Here are the details.
Tesla stock took a big tumble Monday. Shares in the company fell over 7% after new figures showed sales slumping in China, the world's biggest car market. Tesla sold just over 60,000 China-made vehicles in February. That was down 19% on a year earlier, and the lowest figure since December 2022. Those numbers came from the country's Passenger Car Association. They add to concerns that the EV maker faces declining demand and growing competition. Critics say it's burdened by a lack of entry-level models and an aging product lineup. Last week, Tesla unveiled a raft of new incentives in China in a bid to turn things around. That includes subsidies for insurance. But local rival BYD fired back, launching a lower-priced version of its best-selling car. It all escalated an intensifying price war in the market for EVs. Now some analysts are cutting their sales forecasts for Tesla, citing worries over demand. In January, Elon Musk's firm had warned of notably lower growth this year, while it focuses on developing a more affordable new model.
At the same time, the United States government has announced taking action against the risk of Chinese electric vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are hugely seen as a concern because of the ability to remotely take control of such vehicles. NTD's Sean Marshall has more.
Risk of data collection from Chinese electric vehicles has recently become a concern for the United States government. President Biden recently released a statement about the risks of Chinese autonomous electric vehicles collecting the data of American citizens. The statement mentioned China imposes restrictions on American autos and other foreign autos operating in China. Why should connected vehicles from China be allowed to operate in our country without safeguards?
Well, the big push right now is to find out all this Chinese technology that's already built into our cars, whether it's the microchips, the software, the data, who's collecting that data.
Biden stated that this is the government's announcement of taking unprecedented actions to ensure that cars on U.S. roads from countries of concern like China do not undermine our national security. Lauren Fix has a little more information about the current state of car data.
Every time you drive somewhere, that data is collected by the vehicle. We've all seen the automatic software updates where, oh, don't worry about going to the dealer to update your navigation system. They'll take care of that through an automatic software update. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that make this software or the chips behind it or the screens, and a lot of these components come out of China.
Statement from the president comes just a couple days after Chinese technology company Honor showcased an experimental eye-tracking AI function that enables users to remotely open and move their cars by looking at their phone screen. A company that was previously owned by sanctioned Chinese company Huawei. The tool is already available in China, and the company is working to integrate it commercially overseas as the company globally launched its new Magic 6 Pro smartphone.
And therefore, a lot of that data is being collected. Is it being reported back to China? That we don't know. We have a lot of software involved as well. You've got these onboard diagnostic systems that are automatically taking this information and putting it into a computer, an off-site computer, and then who has access to that?
China leads in the EV market share versus all other countries, but a continuing price war and intensifying competition in the market has squeezed profitability for Chinese EV makers. Investors remain cautious as China's auto market has had a volatile start to the year, as competition and macro uncertainties persist, Morgan Stanley said earlier this year. The Secretary of Commerce is being assigned to conduct an investigation into connected vehicles with technology from countries of concern and to take actions to respond to the risks. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And now onto markets. Wall Street's major indexes took a bit of a breather ahead of congressional testimony this week from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, as well as Friday's key jobs report. Here's a quick recap of markets.
The Dow dipped 0.25%, the S&P 500 shed more than 0.1%, and the Nasdaq lost 0.4. Shares of Apple dropped 2.5% following a $2 billion EU antitrust fine for preventing Spotify and other music streaming services from informing users of payment options outside its App Store. Chip stocks rallied, including Nvidia, which gained more than 3.5% as investors continue to bet on demand for products powering artificial intelligence.
We still can't stop talking about AI in general.
Joy Yang is head of product management and marketing at Market Vector Indexes.
People are pricing in future AI growth as well as innovation, and they're looking at the enablers of AI, and these are the pick and shovel makers like NVIDIA, supermicrocomputers, Palantir, and these are stocks that are all up, 70% year to date, over 200% year to date, or 40% year to date. So those are quite significant price movements.
Supermicrocomputers soared more than 18.5% Monday after the AI server maker was selected to join the S&P 500. The AI rally has powered both the Nasdaq and the S&P to recent record closing highs. The S&P 500 has jumped over 21% with 4 straight months of gains through February. In other company news, shares of Macy's jumped 13.5% after investing firm Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management raised their offer for the department store chain. And Spirit Airlines plunged more than 10% after JetBlue called off its merger deal with the ultra-low-cost carrier. Shares of JetBlue gained more than 4%. Investors are awaiting comments from Fed Chair Powell, who was due to testify before lawmakers on Wednesday and Thursday, ahead of the release of Friday's key jobs report.
A nearly $4 billion airlines merger has been grounded. JetBlue and Spirit Airlines will no longer be joining forces over antitrust hurdles, seeing no path forward after a U.S. judge blocked the deal in January on anti-competition concerns. Here's the report.
The proposed merger between JetBlue and Spirit Airlines has been permanently grounded. The low-cost carriers on Monday scrapped the $3.8 billion deal, seeing no path forward after a U.S. judge blocked the merger 2 months ago. The judge said it would harm consumers by reducing competition. JetBlue's decision to cancel its deal to merge with Spirit was welcomed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, who said it was, quote, yet another victory for the Justice Department's work on behalf of American consumers. The Biden administration has taken a hard line against airline mergers and argued the deal would drive up ticket prices. JetBlue CEO Joanna Garrity, in an internal note seen by Reuters, told employees that pushback from the DOJ and the federal court ruling made the probability of moving forward, quote, extremely low. And Spirit CEO Ted Christie, in a statement, said that regulatory obstacles will not permit us to close this transaction in a timely fashion. The deal would have created the 5th largest U.S. carrier and helped Spirit Airlines ensure its survival. The ultra-low-cost carrier has grappled with weak demand in its key markets as it seeks to return to sustainable profitability. Some analysts have even suggested the company could face bankruptcy if it can't shore up finances. Shares of Spirit were down more than 15% in Monday afternoon trading, while JetBlue shares rose more than 1.5%.
And oil prices nudged higher on Monday after OPEC Plus members agreed to extend voluntary oil output cuts to the end of the second quarter, largely in line with market expectations. And this is while Russia pledged to cut production and exports. Let's have a look at this report.
The OPEC Plus group of oil producers is holding firm on measures to boost prices. On Sunday, members agreed to extend oil output cuts of 2.2 million barrels per day into the second quarter. That's a bid to support the market amid concerns that flagging global growth could dent demand. In a surprise move, OPEC ally Russia added to its output curbs. Moscow said it would reduce production by almost another 500,000 barrels per day. Oil prices have been in the balance so far in 2024. They've been supported by geopolitical tensions and attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. But concern over economic growth has pushed the other way. Since 2022, OPEC has pledged a series of production cuts in a bid to prop up prices amid rising output from the US and other non-members. By early afternoon Monday in Asia, international and US benchmark crude prices were trading broadly steady. The weekend also saw moves to limit US oil sales to China. Lawmakers unveiled a bill to ban sales to the country from Washington's Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The issue has been a hot topic since President Joe Biden in 2022 sold China crude from the SPR. That was in a bid to tame oil prices that were then soaring in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And Apple was hit with a $2 billion EU antitrust fine on Monday for preventing Spotify and other music streaming services from informing users of payment options outside of its App Store. Have a look at the details here.
Today, the Commission has fined Apple 1.84 billion euros for abusing its dominant position on the market for the distribution of music streaming apps.
Apple was hit with a $2 billion EU fine on Monday, its first antitrust penalty. It was for preventing Spotify and other music streaming services from informing users of payment options outside its App Store. The European Commission's decision was triggered by a 2019 complaint by Sweden's Spotify over both this restriction and Apple's 30% App Store fees. The EU regulator said Apple's restrictions constituted unfair trading conditions, a relatively novel argument in an antitrust case. It comprised a basic element of €40 million, described by European Competition Commissioner Margrethe Vestager as a parking ticket for the US giant, plus an additional lump sum of €1.8 billion as a deterrent. The antitrust chief said this was the first time the Commission had added a deterrent separate lump sum on top of an antitrust fine.
For a decade, Apple has restricted music streaming app developers from informing their consumers about cheaper options available outside of the app. Apple has done so by contractually imposing anti-steering rules on music streaming app developers.
Vestager ordered Apple to remove these anti-steering provisions and to refrain from similar practices in the future. Apple criticised the EU decision, saying in a statement the decision was reached despite the Commission's failure to uncover any credible evidence of consumer harm and ignores the realities of a market that is thriving, competitive and growing fast. It also said it would challenge the decision in court. A ruling at the Luxembourg-based General Court, Europe's second highest, is likely to take several years. Until then, Apple will have to pay the fine and comply with the EU order.
The Federal Aviation Administration said the agency's 737 MAX production audit into Boeing and supplier Spirit AeroSystems found multiple instances where the companies allegedly failed to comply to manufacturing quality control requirements. Here's more on that.
More work lies ahead for Boeing to get back on course. The Federal Aviation Administration said Monday that it had found numerous issues with production at Boeing and supplier Spirit AeroSystems. Its audit found multiple instances where the companies failed to comply with manufacturing quality control requirements. The FAA also said it found, quote, non-compliance issues in Boeing's manufacturing process control, parts handling and storage, and product control. The FAA has not detailed the corrective actions Boeing and Spirit must take, but sent a summary of its findings to the companies in its completed audit. Spirit AeroSystems, which makes the fuselage for the MAX, said it is, quote, in communication with Boeing and the FAA on appropriate corrective actions. Boeing said that with the audit findings, they now had a, quote, clear picture of what needs to be done. The FAA's audit was prompted by January's mid-air blowout on an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9. Regulators later barred the plane maker from increasing production of the aircraft. Last week, following a meeting with Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun, FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker said Boeing must develop a comprehensive plan to address, quote, systemic quality control issues within 90 days. Whitaker said the plan must incorporate results of the audit and findings from an expert review panel report released last week.
Are flying cars going to be the norm in the near future? Well, right now, apparently, it's appearing to attract many early adopters. Though it's still in its early stages, a SpaceX-backed company has received over 2,850 pre-orders, with deposits down for their $300,000 flying car, and has received a special airworthiness certificate from the FAA. NTD Sean Marshall has more on the story.
Aleph Aeronautics, a SpaceX-backed flying car firm, announced reaching 2,850 pre-orders for their electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. The Aleph Model A two-seater flying car, which, unlike most flying cars, actually resembles an actual car. Aleph Aeronautics CEO Jim Duchovny says there are a number of real-world problems that make the flying car appealing to early adopters.
The obvious solution, there's a reason why people want a flying car, right? It's not because all the science fiction portrayed the flying car. There's actually several real problems, and the major one is obviously traffic. The problem with traffic is the whole reason we have traffic is because you're bounded by physical constraints, right? You're bound physical constraints, and what happens is about every 20 years, the amount of cars in a city doubles, but the amount of roads does not.
Priced at $300,000, the Model A can be pre-ordered on their website with a $150 deposit. Customers can pull their deposit at any time if they want to, so they're not locked in. The 2,850 pre-orders gives it a combined order value of over $850 million. While certified to fly, Duchovny says certification does not allow them to just fly over Los Angeles and San Francisco.
It's a very limited special worthiness certification, allows us to fly in a very restricted areas under for very limited purposes, right? It's very limited. That being said, significance here, it is the car, the physical car, driving, parking in the parking space, fitting in the parking space, looking like a car, which got the airworthiness certificate, which is allowed to fly. This is kind of the big deal.
Duchovny mentioned some connection to his passion for taking cars upward.
My personal story, as I usually try to mention, trying to dedicate it to my father, who passed away just before we unveiled. He was a very famous musician, Soviet musician actually, and he was a genius scientist. Part of his work was used in actually spaceships, and he loved science fiction, and that was my personal main inspiration behind this.
Early investors in Aleph are venture capitalist Tim Draper and Elon Musk's SpaceX. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And Bitcoin has been in the news a lot lately. That's because it scaled a 2-year high on Monday, breaking $65,000 as a wave of money carried it within striking distance of record levels. Take a look at this.
Bitcoin scaled a 2-year high on Monday by breaking $65,000. That's as a wave of money carried it close to record levels. It marks Bitcoin's highest value since late 2021, with the record set in November of that year at 1 cent shy of $69,000. The largest cryptocurrency by market value has gained over 50% this year. Most of its rise has come in the last few weeks, when trading volume has surged for US-listed Bitcoin funds. That's after spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds were approved in the United States earlier this year. Their launch opened the way for a new class of investors to jump in and has reignited an enthusiasm reminiscent of the run-up to record levels in 2021. Smaller rival Ether has also gained on speculation that it too may soon have exchange-traded funds driving inflows. It's up over 50% year-to-date, but as of Monday morning in Europe, hadn't quite hit the 2-year highs made last week.
And it's official. Jeff Bezos is once again the richest person on the planet, edging out Elon Musk. The latest figures come from the Bloomberg Billionaires Index released on Monday. The Amazon founder's net worth is about $200 billion, and Musk trails that number slightly at $198 billion. He has lost about $31 billion over the past year, while Bezos gained about $23 billion. But the bragging rights over who has more wealth have fluctuated over the past year. Musk was considered the world's richest person last May. He beat out businessman Bernard Arnault, who runs one of the world's biggest conglomerates. So, while Bezos may be the top dog right now, Musk and Arnault are still lurking and could replace the Amazon founder at any time. And that's all the stories we have for you today. Before you go, if you have any comments or suggestions you'd like to see implemented in the show or anything else you would like to tell me, please leave a message down below in the comments section. I do read them for every episode, and I do enjoy seeing them, so feel free. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
There's something magical about the movies that I just love, being transported to another world, another life. For me, it was a way to combine all my interests, music, visuals, and storytelling.
Roger Ebert said that a motion picture is an empathy-generating machine. It is the culmination of thousands of years of artists and artistry coming together to tell a single story. There's really nothing like it.
And as a medium, it's really powerful. It has the ability to leave us feeling hopeful or despairing about the world. It also has the ability to shape society.
They were the art form of the 20th century. They were the way we saw the world. Hollywood, they made a lot of very pro-American movies. And in fact, Hollywood invented America to the world in the old days.
But for some, that power isn't used for good.
Marvel's Doctor Strange accused of whitewashing to appease China.
In the original book, the zombie virus originates with a poor peasant boy in the rural countryside of China. It spreads through a black market organ trade. This whole plot line was surgically removed from the final script of the movie.
The new Barbie movie featuring a map of the South China Sea that shows China's ownership of disputed islands.
This is really designed for the eyes of the Chinese censors, and they're trying to kiss up to the Chinese Communist Party.
I believe that most of us, a large majority of us, got involved with China because of the opportunities and the fact that those opportunities also had a bigger calling, which was creating sort of this dynamic between the U.S. and China that was going to allow us to spread the aspirational quality of democracy into a communist country, maybe someday changing them over to a democracy like ours. But over time, all of us have been punched in the nose.
How far back does this go? When did this Hollywood-China relationship start? Why did it start? Is it really just about money? Are there other parts at stake?
All acts of genocide seek to remove from a community their stories. The very first thing.
It's been more than a decade we have not had a major studio put a movie into production with China as the villain.
Makes it so scary that they're able to pressure people to change their behavior from afar without no bullets. This is just money.
It's incredible to me to watch the power that they have.
They don't do this, of course, through direct control. They do it through their enormous economic leverage and the fear from studios on missing out on a market of 1.4 billion people.
What's at stake? The soul of the nation is at stake. Therefore, everything.
The nice thing about living here, as you can see, is you're right by the all-important airport. So if you're doing business in China, that always comes in handy. So I spend a lot of time on planes. It's nice when you're pretty close by. the shipping lane. So like up in my house, you can see the ships coming in from Shanghai's port, Hong Kong.
And they
all
come
come
here?
through this way, and you can see them all go across.
How did you get started with Hollywood especially?
It was just dumb luck. When I graduated school, the economy was not very good. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I read a book called Blue Highways that was written by a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, a guy named William Lee Seat Moon. And he talked about how he got in a van and just traveled across the country, and he visited different towns and cities and figured out what the heartbeat of America was. And I just thought that sounded super cool. That was like my Jack Kerouac type of like idea of, okay, well, I'm gonna do that and find a place to settle down, and then eventually, you know, somebody convinced me to come out to LA to visit, and I never left.
Wow.
And then next thing I know, I hear about the Hollywood business, and it was called the Wall Street of the 90s back then. I was like, wow, there's a lot of great opportunity. It sounded like whoever wanted to work the hardest could rise up.